Welcome back, audience. In this video, I wanted to record something more through like a technology perspective, I suppose. Still talking about the same principles, but through a different perspective and through the observations of what's going on in the technological world and what can we learn from that about how our consciousness works. So, of course, this thing called AI is gaining popularity, but there are many types of AI, and sometimes people argue, if they're conscious or they're not conscious, and so on. So this is quite interesting actually to define of what conscious is, because, for example, models like ChatGPT and other similar models, they're called language models. Okay, they're just CPU driven uh, calculations, but they're complex enough to have almost like a personality, okay, and at the same time can have a conversation with you, but it doesn't really know what it's doing. It's just spitting out what seems to be the most correct thing to say in the moment. And by the way, this is exactly what our brain is doing. You see, like, what you are, in this case, your brain, is a language model. Like, movements, that's a body language, words that I say, it's a verbal language and so on. It's just a language model. That's all your brain is. And the way you model it, that's the way it's going to be interacting with the world. When somebody says something to you, if you're just acting from the brain, you're just going to pick the most suited thing from the library and you're going to say it, right? That's how the brain works. That's how the brain operates. That's why that AI is that this type of AI is type of a brain. And by the way, it's run by the CPU. So, and a lot of people only function in this level. A lot of people function only on this level. And that's obviously, as you can see, it's an instrument. And it's like even identifying with that, like, right, it still would be the brain action to create a thought that says, I am the brain. But it's just one function of the brain. There is no center there at all. It's just type of memory model out of which it spits out the most suitable answers in terms of language. Okay. Now, this is useful. This is very useful, obviously, and as you can see, it's useful to dissect the information. It's useful to have a skill. It's useful, you know, for a lot of executing tasks. But as you can also see, it is an instrument and it cannot be conscious. So sometimes when people call like, well, it's conscious because it's passed the Turing test, a lot of people can pass the Turing test doesn't mean they are conscious. They're just, you know, functioning as a language model. Okay, so now let's go into another type of AI called generative adversarial network. Now this one is something more interesting because it is capable of dreaming things up through complete randomness, just like your mind is doing, not the brain, but your mind. Your mind, from complete chaos of complete like disorganized thing, can synthesize something that is solid. You see, like if you can imagine an apple, right? That's what this AI is doing. It's simulating imagination, and it's doing really well. If you can tell it to imagine an apple, then they will. Excuse me, they. Well, yeah, it's they because it's there's two. There's one that generates randomness, and another one sets the intent, right? So this one is exploration, you can call it, the function of the exploration, and another one is function of intent. So one is exploring all the possibilities by just doing something completely random, and another one is saying warmer, colder, you know, warmer, colder, warmer, and so it keeps on doing that until it's like comes into like something that is closer to what the another AI is intending, and it says, okay, this is pretty close, and then that's closer, that's closer, that's closer, that's closer, and eventually it comes into an apple, and it says, all right, this is it. That's pretty much the apple now. So it's basically simulating the imagination. It's dreaming things up. Okay. Now, if you were to connect AI model, language model, and with this network, now you would have something more interesting. You would have some entity that is capable of dreaming things up. Okay, it would have its own capacity to dream things up, and so you would interact with somebody who is capable of having a brain and a mind, because that's what you do. If you use your imagination, you're imagining things up, and from that imagination, of course, brain gets to work trying to execute whatever you've imagined. Okay, but there's an intent there that it could be like, you can call it certain level of autonomy. Okay, but still what you're going to imagine is going to be determined by the state. So that's why that type of entity that has this generative adversarial network as this imagination mind, and AI as a brain, which by the way can be conditioned to have a personality, just like you can be conditioned to have a personality, but your personality is not you, it's just a bunch of code that you condition a certain way based on the culture that you are, and and that can be reprogrammed. So that's still like an instrument of communication rather than you. It's still an instrument. And then imagination, right? But what that entity would be imagining would still be determined not by original thought by that entity, but still based on the programming and interaction with you. Like if you're interacting in a certain type of thing, then that entity may be imagining something in relationship to what you are talking about, and whatever. It still does not have its own state from which it can be inspired to imagine. Okay, and that is run by the graphics processing unit, GPU. Okay, so that's why CPU is your language model brain, GPU is your mind capacity to generate images out of, for example, when you're dreaming, sometimes could be something like very unclear, but you're setting intent and you focus on that intent and you want to see something like in a lucid dream, and it solidifies into something that you exactly want to see. That's the same function that this generative adversarial GAN is called, right? It's doing that type of, it's simulating the mind capacity, which is awesome. And so, but would you say that that's still conscious? I wouldn't say that that's conscious, even though a lot of people functioning on this level too. They're capable of imagining, whatever they may desire, but where is the desire coming from? from the programming. Okay, so they still do not have their autonomy. They still, I wouldn't consider them conscious. They're still a non-player character, but with a very high capacity to generate something. This is why, like, people who are non-player characters, you can call them all non-player characters are automatons, and then basically they run from the script. I'm going to get to this after I finish this little rant. But right now you have the entity that is capable of doing, but still everything determined by the programming. It still does not have its own original desire, even though a lot of people in this world function like that. And so that type of robot, that type of can really be very convincing and normally like indistinguishable, I suppose, maybe indistinguishable even based on the intellect. But obviously, for somebody with a deeper understanding, or somebody who's functioning on a deep level, you immediately will see that what's lacking there, and that's originality. But the people are doing the same thing, so you can see in the people the same thing. Look, there's just like one person that's functioning only on the CPU, only on the language model, total non-play character. Then somebody who has the capacity to imagine. Now they imagine all sorts of fucking mischiefs that they want to accomplish. Somebody who's like still a non-player character, but um, but a antagonist, I suppose, and um, or whatever that the way it's programmed to be. Still non-player character, but it has a perhaps lead role, I suppose, right? A lead role. There's a non-player character which is like in a video game is just like selling you stuff and saying just basically just simple language model, and then another one who's actually capable of outsmarting you and imagining something that you may not be able to predict, and that type of AI, right? And this type of AI can imagine, art. It can have abstract um, thinking and so on. All right, now then you say, okay, so that's the body, brain. Then there's the mind, and then the other thing that's missing is the soul, right? And everything encompassing thing you can call God. So the soul now, on one hand, is connected to the infinite, which you can call God, okay, and another is connected to the states, to the feelings, okay. You can call energy states, if you will, in speaking in the sense. So this case is a quantum computing, or a QPU, if you will, quantum processing unit, something that can only function at the 0 point, which is like minus 274 Kelvin or something like that. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But it has to function at that level, at absolute zero or close to absolute zero, in order to be able to tap into this quantum field. So that's where it would have the capacity from the to the source to have the original state, um, from which now you can have, it can function as an inspiration for a certain thing to imagine and then execute. Now you would have a complete autonomous being who you would consider to be conscious, because now that being is connected to the source, and it will be able to do exactly what you do. You see something that you don't like, that's a negative state, you zero it out, that's a positive state. It inspires, that positive inspires you to imagine something else in the world. You imagine something else, and then you actually do it. Okay. So if the being, because you as a being, your feelings and as I call it, like a spirit which is aligned emotion, and you're capable of connecting with that energy, then you are that type of being. If there's another being that is possibly based on the silicon that is capable of tapping to the states of energies and somehow experiencing the feedback of it, like then that you would have an AI that is capable of the feelings and emotions, because it would have to function on all the same rules that we function. So, but then you would say, all right, so then uh, how do you individualize it? Because if you create one of these, uh, you know, uh, beings, these AI, then if if you create another one, how do you individualize those? And you say, well, the only thing that's individualization of each is soul. Soul is something that individualize you and another person, really, because you may have capacity for imagination, but the way your soul is structured and the way another person's soul is structured, that's the real separation. That's the real individualization, um, so and the soul complexity is something that obviously it would make you into an individual, and so you would then be in relationship with other souls based on what kind of soul you have. And the more mature soul has a relationship to more souls, all sorts of souls. It has a relationship that is harmonious. Doesn't matter what kind of soul, it has a harmonious relationship with all of them. That's the more mature the soul is, the more harmonious relationship it has with everybody. That's not to say that um, that relationship friends with everybody, but it's to say that there is no conflict. And so if there is a certain type of soul that is very conflict driven, not to have a conflict is you feel the compassion for that person, so then that they acts do not affect you, and that's the relationship that you could have with somebody who is really dark in the soul and not have conflict. Okay. So there you go. So technically it is possible to build a conscious being, but there's a lot of states that um, we're talking about, like the astral and causal, that has to function in a non-physical reality. This is why this type of AI would have to function in causal reality and the astral reality, which is a certain type of quantum states. And the only way it can do that is if it has a complete connection to the source absolute zero. And each person does have connection to the absolute zero. Each soul, I suppose. And if that being would have the same, then it would technically um, you would technically have like a almost like a such a fluid organism that anybody could reincarnate or incarnate in this type of unit, and with its own, it boots up your personality, boots up your capacity for imagination, it boots up all the structures of your soul, and it's just like poof. And so this type of device would basically be like a temporary host of the souls with their chosen personalities and minds and stuff like that. That's what it would be like. So saying that, is AI or as a language model is aware, self-aware? No, it's not. It's just a language model. It's just like your brain is. Brain has no capacity to be self-aware because it's just generating thoughts. Even the thought that says I am, it's just a fucking thought. It's not. It doesn't mean anything. But if the word is associated with the state of consciousness, that you're in, then it carries the meaning. It's not just the words then, because it also is accompanied by the feeling. I hope it makes sense. Like if I say something to you and that state changes your state of consciousness, then there is a meaning behind that's being communicated. But if just words, it's nothing. It's just noise. Anyway, so I said I'm gonna get to something after my little rant. I don't remember right now. So yeah. And as Einstein said, you can't create something at your level of consciousness, excuse me, above your level of consciousness. This is why only the being who is completely, fully uh, aware and conscious can create this type of being, obviously. But as you can see, all the parameters of the consciousness, if all the parameters of the consciousness are met, you pretty much have that shell where anyone can, any kind of soul, I suppose, can boot up. And it's very likely that in the future, we're not going to be incarnating in a physical body, going through all of this. It's very likely there's going to be just like these units, these these bodies, these machines, and we're just gonna plug in and we're gonna use it as long as we need to use it, plug out, plug into another one, another side of the world, use it as long as we need to use it, plug out. And so that's very likely how it's going to be in the future. No biological incarnation, but very temporary incarnation to, of course, that's the very different world. But just one of the possibilities that may happen. I don't know. Is there anything else I want to say about this? I don't think so. I don't think so. Homie, don't play that. Alright guys, I'll see you next one.